We're still streaming in for our session here, so I know we've passed the top of the hour mark. We'll give it about 3 more minutes. So at 1:05, at least my time here, we will get started. So, but hopefully you guys hang out. It should be a fun session today, and no worries, it is not business formal. It's just that me and Harris just tried to look good today. So.
Yeah, there looks like they're still in the bubble tea making session.
Everyone, thank you so much for coming to today's session on building your leadership in board governance. We definitely hope to have your full participation from today, as we will have sections during our presentation, and our lovely Mila will actually be moderating our chat to ask certain questions and definitely get some feedback to us and to everyone here throughout today. Now, first off, let me introduce myself. My name is Ngoc Vu Nguyen from NAP, North Carolina. I, along with Harris Zhao, are part of the chapter development team. And I'll let Harris quickly introduce himself before we kind of go into the meat of today's meeting. So Harris,
my name is Harris Zhao. I'm from the NAP Boston chapter. I also want to mention a few things. I'm also a Dragon Boat coach, and I am a practicing project manager. So I want to bring some of that experience with my professional career and this cultural Dragon Boat team in the sports part of the world into this presentation today. So Vu and I have a lot of great guidelines that we want to share with everybody, and we really hope that you participate using the chat.
Absolutely. Thank you, Harris. Now, a quick disclaimer for everyone here. I know Harris is definitely a project manager, so there are some aspects of this kind of topics in today's session that may resonate with him in his day-to-day. But I do have to make a quick disclaimer that we are definitely not, working in the organizational development consulting field, nor do we actually work in the nonprofit field. I especially am not a nonprofit person, but we are just like everyone here. We just really wanted to learn about building our chapters and whatever stage it may be. And we hope that today's topics today are relevant for you all. So with that being said, let me quickly go through today's agenda. Now, as I'm going through the agenda slide here, I want everyone to quickly write in the chat window what they hope to get out of today's session. So, and I will prompt Mila afterwards to kind of let me know what people have said. But really, to kind of sum up our agenda today, as new or current leaders of NAP, one of the main things we all have to continually work on is ensuring that we understand our respective chapter and also NAP vision and mission statement to help create a realistic and objective roadmap to build a culture that is in line with our vision, making sure that we help with this vision statement, help set the tone for everyone to recruit and retain diverse talent on your leadership team, to understand the resources to help build financing, and also continually measure the impact of your respective chapter as a whole. So that's kind of today's agenda. You can kind of see on the screen there, strategy, culture, recruitment, finance, and performance are our 5 main topic items here. So before I go into strategy here, Mila, is there any kind of comments that you see on the chat window that you would like everyone to share?
Yeah, absolutely. So we already have got a few comments coming in. Erica shares that she'd like to gain new strategies around recruitment, and that we also have Cindy saying she'd like to know and communicate value proposition for board members to recruit and retain them. And it's recurring where people, Chingley says, retaining strong volunteer base as well. And to me, if I'm pronouncing your name correctly, it also shares timeline and checklist for a new chapter. And Chiang Mai shares how the chapter board and committees work together to align with the chapter strategy. And also from Terence, how can we best express our authentic voice? So it's a lot of questions surrounding around sustainability and retaining and building that strong base.
Awesome. Thank you, Mila. And definitely Based on your comments alone, I know that some of these items that you guys have mentioned definitely are not covered in today's slide, but we also don't want to hinder that. So we will have time for open dialogue amongst all of us, kind of talk through what's top of mind based on the agenda items here. So with that being said, let's start off with our first agenda item, which is planning the direction, the strategy for your chapter as a whole. So in terms of your strategy, it's kind of, I always like to kind of say it's like setting your compass, kind of your North Star that was actually used in last year's NLA. So the first kind of component here is finding your direction and defining your vision. Now, when we mention vision, it's the vision statement, right? So we definitely have NAP's vision statement for NAP National, which is NAP is the premier leadership organization for Asian professionals. That's definitely a great vision to have. But what about your chapter? Now, again, a vision statement is defined as the desired future position of your chapter. A vision statement focuses on tomorrow and what your chapter wants to ultimately become. Now, having a solid representative vision statement in place for your chapter will help your leadership team establish a very clear direction and future for your chapter. Members will also know what goals need to be met and how to accomplish them so they can help with the overall mission of the chapter to be a success. Now, a vision statement also represents not only the chapter brand, but NAP's brand as a whole, and shows non-members, people, potential members, what you and NAP stands for. Now, this is, again, in return, helps increase the support for your chapter and NAP as a whole. And it's important to note that a vision statement is only successful if time and effort is taken by your leadership team to create one that is truly representative of the mission of your chapter. So lots of long words here. Don't mean to go into a lecture per se, but really the main points here for kind of your vision is it's your future, your kind of where do you want to be, where your chapter wants to be. Now, to write a vision statement, there's a couple of tips here. We got to definitely be clear and concise. So my entire explanation and definition of the vision statement is definitely kind of foreboding per se, because I mentioned you have to be clear and concise. It's supposed to meant to be short and to the point. Your vision statement also should be inspiring. It should not only represent the goals of your chapter, but it should also be inspiring to those who are trying to fill those goals, to give them kind of that want, that urge to kind of continue forward with the chapter's mission. It has to be motivating. It definitely has to be future tense, since that is where we want to be. Then also it has to be goal driven, having specific goals that you're trying to achieve there. So we've got your vision statement. We have your, we're setting our compass to say, hey, this is where we want to be. This is where we want to go. But where do we start from here? So understanding your starting point, you're going to have to do a SWOT analysis. This was mentioned in Liliana's, conversation yesterday, but that SWOT analysis is going to give your organization confidence and a better idea of what strategic direction you want to go, and as well as an idea of what issues will need to be dealt with too. Now, we definitely want to leverage our chapter's strengths and opportunities and definitely learn from and prepare for any weaknesses and threats that are unique to our environment in your chapter. Now, the important thing to note about the SWOT analysis, it's to dive deep. You got to be really specific. You got to go into the details because, and this is also going to probably involve a lot of folks, not just you and your leadership team, but reaching out to your members as well. These kind of different perspectives as you go through your analysis definitely can be enlightening. And we also want to make sure that we cover all of our bases to ensure success. Now, outlining kind of your chapter's goals and objectives, they need to be specific. They need to be realistic as well. However, though, as we go later into the slides here, they also need to be revisited and adaptable. And really, after you figure out where your kind of starting point is, you can then build your mission statement. Now, the mission statement is that kind of fundamental purpose and that reason your chapter and NAP exists as a whole. It describes the needs of the organization and how it was created and answers the basic question, what guides us from day to day? Now, there should be no ambiguity about the mission statement as well as you implement your kind of vision going forward. So beforehand here, as I move on to the next slide, we're gonna figure out, with that mission statement, we've got our vision, we've got a North Star, we've got our mission statement all set up here. Now we need to chart our destination, make that process to go in terms of strategy. So we're going from looking at the horizon to traveling towards the horizon. And there's kind of 3 questions that I've taken. There's definitely more questions out there we need to consider. One is, what steps can we take to execute on our mission statement? Who would be the best person on point to achieve specific goals of our mission statement? And of course, what's the right timeline to achieve our goal? And again, I mentioned things that you can do to kind of set your compass is that SWOT analysis, defining your timeline, and also figuring out what works for your chapter. Harris had given me a really great example as we were going through this. I'm paraphrasing here, but he heard a really awesome quote that the moment your organization looks backwards towards, I guess it's shadow when you're looking past tense, it's the moment where you are no longer a leader. You always got to look towards the sun and know that the future is in front of you, not behind you. That's going to be important, especially with your vision, because you always want to make sure that I've got to be heading towards that North Star. And also I have to make sure that my mission statement to support my vision allows me to do so. Now, with all this being said, you see this kind of table right here on the left-hand side, the cascade of strategic choices, organizational strategy, figuring things out. There's a lot of things, a lot of concepts that are out there. And again, as I mentioned, I'm not a consultant by any trade, but this was one model as we were researching that really kind of plays to what should be good for your NAP chapters. It's kind of this perspective and an adaptable strategy. Now, sometimes when we set out our specific goals in our mission statement, or when we kind of figure out what our direction should be, we tend to put an emphasis on you've got to go from path A to path B to reach your goal. And sometimes that works, but a lot of times it doesn't, because the complexity of your environment changes. With that being said, this chart, this cascade of strategic choices, which was created by the Monitor Institute by Deloitte, really helps put out kind of questions that we all need to ask as leaders for our chapter on how to set our strategic plan. It is, what is our vision and our theory of change? Where will we play? How will we succeed? And what capabilities will we need? And I'm not going to go through all the list here. You guys can read that as a whole. But as we go on to the next slide, in terms of the adaptive strategy, it's really going to be kind of high level here. With set goals, know that there's not just one approach to achieving your goal. You've got to be adaptable. And as your chapter progresses in each stage of your strategy, as you're looking at your timelines, just make sure that your leadership team revisits and reorients when needed and based on the current environment. So with that being said, the one question I wanted to pose to everyone here is, what have your chapters or yourself done to ensure that the strategy set is objective, obtainable, and adaptable? So I'm going to stop here real quick, and you feel free to, again, to write in the chat, or if you want to put yourself on mute and actually share your answer to this question, would love to hear from you all. So I'll give it 2 seconds here, and hopefully someone can take the reins. All right, 2 seconds are up. So as we're waiting for answers to come in, Harris, anything you want to add or anything around strategy that you feel that needs to be covered quickly before we go into culture?
Yeah, just one thing. Strategy needs to be explicit. It needs to be on paper. It's great you have a strategy in your head, but if you don't put it down on paper, it's going to be that much harder to follow. Be explicit about it.
Okay. Mila, I will ask you real quick, anything on the chat window or anything that you've seen with answers to this question?
So Eric from the DC chapter had mentioned that our chapter is focusing on using SMART goals. SMART, Erica, I forgot what it actually stands for, but it is measurable, achievable, and the RNT I can't remember. But those are some of the things that, yes, correct. Thank you, Cindy. Strategy has got, that's what the DC chapter is focusing. And I just do have a follow-up question. just, building that culture, right? And building, Harris, you said that, a culture and strategy is explicit. And I would like to pose this question because previously in the previous slide, you mentioned about opportunities, right? The SWOT analysis. How can we take the weaknesses? Because sometimes as leaders, we focus on weakness and we can sometimes get discouraged by it. How can we take weaknesses and look at that as an opportunity and build our culture upon to become an evolving culture?
Harris, do you want me to take that, or do you want me to, or do you want to take that?
You can take it, Vu.
Well, I was going to say, especially with weaknesses, the one thing too, as a leader, you personally have to say, okay, I'm not going to let this get me down. So when I mentioned about weaknesses, especially for NAP, I'm going to take my example of NAP North Carolina. We are we've only been we're still in infancy per se. We've only been in production in 1 year. So we definitely had a lot going on, but one of the weaknesses that we saw was actually membership location. So our overall leadership team is based in Raleigh. I'm actually based in Charlotte, North Carolina. So the first thing that I knew is, especially for someone who's doing corporate sponsorships, is that I can't be recruiting folks in Charlotte, and how can I have that value add, to our folks in Raleigh, especially where all of our members are in Raleigh. But so that's one thing. It's daunting because, crap, I'm really far away from everyone else. Maybe some of the work that we do on our leadership team could be Raleigh centric. However, though, it's up to you individually and speaking with your leadership team to find opportunities to change that weakness to an opportunity. So what's kind of our fix here? What did I do? Well, when speaking to our leadership team in North Carolina, we mentioned that even though our membership base is in Raleigh, it gives us the opportunity, especially with the work from home environment, to bring in Charlotte businesses or Charlotte companies to do virtual events, because that's actually, location isn't then a issue at all. It's figuring out, okay, are there companies here in Charlotte that has a presence in Raleigh? Am I able to kind of speak to them and say, look, we've got members in Raleigh, we are building members in Charlotte. Is there any kind of collaboration opportunities that you see company A or sponsorship A? And from there, you're making kind of those changes to kind of push it forward. So again, it's adapting to what you have, figuring out what can I do that can add value to our vision statement, our vision, our mission, and then just finding opportunities based on there. So,
thank you, Vu.
You're welcome. Well, with that being said, I will move on now to culture with Harris taking this segment here.
Yeah.
So go ahead, Harris.
So now you got a strategy, you got a vision, you got a mission in front of you. It's explicit, it's written down on paper. Now, the next thing I want you to focus on is creating the environment, creating your culture. What, as a chapter, as an organization, what do you hope to be, and what do you hope your people, your volunteers, your leaders are acting like? So if you can go to the next slide, Vu. So let's go over the fundamental definitions. What is culture? Culture is a set of shared beliefs, values, and practices. And why does culture matter? Just like any company is selling a product to its customer for a $, you as a leader are selling your culture as a product to your people, your volunteers, your other leaders, your board members. That culture is that currency. And then who is culture for? Let's be very clear. Your culture is for your leaders and your volunteers and anyone who is a part of your team. And you guys hear this a lot. It's probably cheesy, but it's true. A great culture attracts amazing people. So if you can go to the next slide, Vu. So let's talk about just general guidelines. These are general guidelines, not iron rules. Let's just talk about it. Truly amazing culture starts at the top. And that means everyone on this call, you are in some way, shape, or form part of the leadership team in your own chapters, and truly amazing culture is created and starts at the top. However, it also requires buy-in from every level of the organization, everybody who works for that leadership team, everybody who works for that board, et cetera, et cetera. Now, also culture is what you say and what you do. And what you say and what you do, it matters to people. As a Dragon Boat coach, I can't be lollygagging and drinking a beer and having a cookie before a race. I need to practice what I preach. If I want my team to be a winning team, I need to practice what I preach. And that means everyone on this call has to embrace their culture as soon as they've defined it and practice it. And so I also want to mention in the third part that it's a learning opportunity too. Great culture is that just doesn't happen to appear in front of you all of a sudden because you make a wish. You have to practice it, and you got to commit to it, and you got to embrace it. And then also remember, culture is a commitment to your people. At the heart of every organization are your people. Without people, there is no organization, there is no chapter, and in fact, there will be no NAP. And so you got to really focus on the people part of this. And if you can go to the next slide, and feel free to comment other general rules into the chat, and we'll talk about it. So how do we build culture? Well, first of all, we got to recognize that every company, every organization, every team has a culture. So why don't you create a culture that you enjoy? It's really hard working in an environment and the 9 to 5, thinking, oh, I don't really like this work. And if you are a leader and you are a manager of your team and you are not in a place in a culture that you like, you have something to do to change it. So step one, a lot of us have already done this exercise. What are your core values? Agree with your team what your core values are. Are they, diversity, inclusion, equity? Make sure we're equitable for all employees and leaders. Make sure you put them down on paper and you establish it with your team and get buy-in from your team. Next, you want to work on making sure everyone in your organization, leaders and volunteers, board members, etc., are encouraged to focus on work that they're passionate about and that relates back to those values. We want to make sure that people who come into our organization, especially as a volunteer organization, that we are putting people's efforts towards something that they care about and not doing something for the sake of doing something. And then we'll go on to step 3. We want to support established connections in the team by giving everyone the opportunity to create and build relationships within the organization. A culture is not a siloed effort. A culture is a together part of the organization where you meet, connect, and talk to other folks. And so as a leadership team, as leaders in your organization, are you doing enough to bridge those connections and make those connections available? If not, then I want you to think about how you can, because that the connections there are really what makes a great culture and really helps build upon each other. And then step 4, as a leader, I want you to think about how you can connect people's roles to purpose. Purpose in not just make NAP a better place, but purpose in the overall setting of this world. And you got to make that connection very clear. So I want to also give an example of what we do in Boston. And before we go back to the other side, a great culture statement is both a declaration of who we are right now and who we aspire to be. And in Boston, we did an exercise, and this is what we came up with. You can go to the next slide, Vu. This is who we are. We are a community of Asian American professionals who aspire to raise the bar of what it means to lead. These are our values. We uphold the value of leadership in everything that we do, from roundtable conversations to community barbecues. We commit to empowering professional excellence in everyone we meet and believe in the value of accountability and diversity. When you volunteer with us, we want you to work on a project that creates meaningful impact. When you join as a member, we hope you are able to connect, engage, and participate in our diverse selection of events. And when you leave any one of our events, we hope you leave feeling inspired and equipped to make a difference in this world. And here at NAP Boston, we build leaders. So I see a lot of things in the chat. Mila, if you want to go ahead and talk through some of those.
Yeah, sure. So one of the things that Brian had mentioned is, should culture building be top down, bottom up, and or circular? That's one of the questions from Brian. Would you like to take that question?
Yeah. I won't say there's a right answer, but it's much easier to have great culture start from the top. Much easier than if you expect a volunteer to build that culture and have them bring to the top. Because at the top, that's where you have the money. You got the people with power who can hire, recruit talent, etc. And you also got people who, and we got to be honest, titles matter, And titles, for some reason, make others want to, how do you say, participate a little more than if you say, oh, I'm just a volunteer for working 5 hours, et cetera. But if you say, I'm a leader of this nonprofit and here's a culture I want, it does a lot more to build that culture than otherwise.
Thank you. And Susan mentions recruitment plays a big role. How diverse is the membership and the leadership team? Are they all in finance and consulting?
That's something you got to work on. Yeah. If you preach that you are a diverse organization, well, look at your leadership team first. Look at your leadership team. Is it made out of people of diverse backgrounds, cultures? In Boston, we created an exercise where we looked at all these cultures and events and traditional events. Terrence Key is actually the mastermind of that project. And we would try to start looking at areas that we are lacking and try to recruit for them. And then also don't forget, you got diversity in temperaments, diversity in age, in sexuality, and other things. So to have a really strong leadership team, look at your diversity in your own team first. So yes.
One more question, that's from me. So my question is, being a leader, even if it's not DC, and we belong to the API community, my question would be, how do we build an inclusive culture where it isn't exclusive? Because it quickly and easily can become exclusive. Even within the API community, there are peripheral minority groups where they don't feel as though they recognize being part of the API community. But in the larger lens, how do we build an inclusive culture where we are really conscious of not being exclusive?
Yeah, I'll leave with one. I call it my golden rule. I follow this to the T. Always invite everybody to the table. Have them decide whether or not they accept or decline the invitation, but always invite people to the table, invite people to a conversation.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Harris, and thank you, Mila, for that. Just wanted a quick time check for everyone here. We're at the bottom of the hour here, so I know our session ends here in about 15 minutes, but I definitely enjoy this dialogue that we have. We will kind of be moving a little bit quickly just so that we can get some time for us to kind of speak more. So actually, to Susan's point, actually our next subject was actually on recruitment. So what best way to transition through Susan's question as a whole is really assembling your dream team, your leadership team as a whole. So, building for success in terms of growing, sustaining your respective chapter, we know there's nothing more vital than kind of getting those high qualified, those diverse, and of course, enthusiastic members to serve on that leadership team. Now, every prospective member that comes into the leadership team should bring a unique element to the team itself. So it's always great to have kind of an ideal composition for your chapter to kind of help have that kind of mix of skills, expertise, networks, and perspectives that should benefit your chapter. Now, there's one thing here I just want to quickly caveat, or not caveat, but to note here. In terms of building for success, even though we're talking at the beginning of recruiting, it's also going to be important closer to the end, succession planning. And I just wanted to make a quick plug here that if you didn't have the ability to attend yesterday's panel on this very subject of succession planning, highly recommend going through the recording when it comes available. Definitely we don't want to take their thunder per se, but it is important to note that with leadership, it's also knowing that continuity is key. So with that being said, let's move on to the next slide here. The team composition. To Susan's point, it seems like, the question, should we, if our environment around us is primarily finance and consultants as a whole, is that considered an ideal mix? I don't know, it depends, but it's always nice to have kind of diverse backgrounds, diverse careers coming in. So the answer here is, what is the ideal mix? Well, there's really no ideal mix, but it's a mix that works specifically with your chapter. So items to kind of consider as part of that mix is going to be those professional skills and experiences. You do definitely want to bring leaders that come from many years in the industry. If it is a finance professional, if they do mental health or whichever. But I think also there are some benefits of bringing someone who's just new to the table, to the corporate world, or to the after graduation per se. Why? Because they have a little bit more of a fresh perspective as versus to those hardened, experienced veterans that say this is the way, that type of thing. So it's always good to have that diversity in terms of experiences and professional skills. Of course, the importance of background and demographics. It's going to be very interesting when we as NAP leaders say that we are champions for AAPI and your entire board is Chinese. So really hard to kind of get that message across. So it's up to you and your leadership team to ensure that you have that mix out there. And of course, networking is always key. And again, I take an example from NAP North Carolina. When I jumped on board on our board, they definitely leveraged me because everyone on our board either worked in nonprofit, actually worked in the mental health sector, and they didn't actually have anyone actually in finance or in the Charlotte area. So that's why I came on board, because that type of access that I have would be a huge role to play and benefit for NAP North Carolina. So also one thing to note, that the importance of diversity, as we established, it's going to be key in kind of setting your team up and help also identify any gaps that you may need to cover. Now, note, a diverse team is only part of what makes a more equitable environment. We have to make sure that diversity means making sure that people's voices are heard, that people feel respect and valued, and that they are in environments where they can do their best work. And that's actually where inclusion comes in. Fostering that kind of inclusive environment can be modeled by your leadership team by reaching out to others, to your membership base as a whole, to have these kind of intentional conversations about ways the chapter could be more inclusive in all of its facets and operations. So moving into kind of, you've got a prospect in mind, you have, what can we do to kind of make sure that this prospect is that right fit? And these are only one of many, many questions. And again, very unique to your chapter. So don't feel like this is the bread and butter list of prospect questions. So it's really the biggest thing is, does the candidate or your prospect understand the vision and goals of your chapter? And again, this goes back to that strategy point. If you, the leadership team, don't really have a good founding on your vision and mission statement, how can you use that to recruit people? So it has to be firm, and it has to be stable, and that person has to understand it. If your leadership team understands it, then the candidate can also understand it. They also have to understand we are NAP. Do they understand the vision and goals of NAP as a whole? Does this person coming in, do they have actually a place on the team? And are they actually interested starting in that capacity? This is always a very interesting topic of being voluntold to do something. Of course, being voluntold may have its benefits and also may have its disadvantages, but we want to make sure, especially from a nonprofit standpoint, especially for all of us here, we're all volunteers. We want to do this. We have a desire, a drive to do so. So this question is going to be important. Are they actually interested in doing it? Or are they just kind of, walking around the sidelines and saying, oh, I like NAP, I like your chapter, but we got to make sure that they're engaged, that they have that true thirst to be on the board. Of course, understanding the responsibilities and what's actually expected of them in their specific roles. And the one thing to note, we may not always talk about this from time to time, but it's important to say, are there any potential conflicts of interest? That could be, businesses, it could be relationships as a whole. From a nonprofit, from an inclusive standpoint, we want to make sure that there are no conflicts of interest, because that could be driving a particular agenda that strays you away from your vision and your mission statement. And of course, the last question that I have at least on here is, does the candidate kind of fill any gaps? Do we have people that are, coming in to help with a specific role, or is it someone who kind of will be supporting someone else? That's up to your leadership team. That's up to who you're trying to recruit for. Are you trying to fill a gap? Are you trying to support an existing strength that your leadership team has? But that's something that should be evaluated with your team when you bring people on board. So with that being said, I'm going to quickly go through finances because we are close to the witching hour here. So finances as a whole, I'm going to be really quick. Everyone's facing a cash crunch. We know that COVID-19, when it hit in 2020, nonprofits definitely felt the biggest impact of that. And with nonprofits, fundraising is actually the biggest challenge for many chapters, teams, and organizations. It's also hard because holding those membership dollars or those dollars coming into our chapters, they're actually kind of low. And this is some of the data that actually supports that. So we do know, look, it's going to be tough to keep dollars in, to bring new dollars in, especially when we're not prospecting sponsors as a whole. But everyone in your leadership team has a role to play in finances. So first things first, take an inventory of your financial accounts. Your treasurer, the presidents need to have at the beginning of every year their financial situation, understand what's coming in and what's also coming out. What's kind of your cash flow coming, kind of projected for the year as a whole. Understand what strengths and weaknesses your chapter has in terms of funding, and make sure you're setting very clear expectations with your team on what you're hoping your finance goals are for the chapter. Don't always rely on the treasurer to give you the monthly update and says, hey, we are A, B, and C, we're losing A, B, and C, and we're gaining A, B, and C. Everyone plays a role in this. Now, unfortunately, we don't have the time to go through everything, but the one thing I do want to note for everyone is we get a lot of questions of how can I bring sponsors in? How can I bring money dollars in? We know corporate sponsorships are key. So it's up to your leadership team to help identify, evaluate, and prospect potential funding sources. It could be potential sponsorships with local organizations or companies if on a particular event. Or it actually could be donor sponsorships through your chapter itself. And the one big thing I always, and me being new to corporate sponsorships, what helped me a lot was the sponsorship perspective of NAP. There's a lot of great information here that I always ask folks to always read up. I know Cindy did a quick update of this in her status of NAP. I encourage everyone. This information on the prospective is what's going to help you advertise and tell folks what sponsors, what their ROI is going to be if they invest with you, your chapter, and NAP as a whole. So with that being said, I'm going to quickly switch over to Harris to talk about performance.
Thank you. So we only got a few minutes left, so I will be quick, and I hope I can answer your question, Brian. So measuring impact, if you want to go to the next slide, measuring impact is much different than measuring these basic metrics. These basic metrics, yeah, they're important, but they don't really measure true success when you're talking about our mission and vision statement. You can talk all day long about dollars raised, membership numbers, volunteer numbers, et cetera, but how do you measure real success in your mission? So I want to talk a little bit through that. I don't have all the answers, but I hope to provide a few examples of what we do in NAP Boston. So you can go to the next slide. I've got basically two different models. The first one is a logic model. Just ask, first say, what measurable change are you striving for to achieve in the long term? This should be pretty straightforward for each one of our chapters. We're a nonprofit organization that cultivates and empowers AAPI leaders through leadership development, professional networking, and community service. Now you ask, how about in the short term? What measurable change are you striving to achieve? For us here in Boston, it's professionals are able to learn, practice, and then apply those leadership skills in personal and professional careers. People are able to meet and connect with mutual purpose. Members are able to give back and be a part of their local communities. And then once you get talking about those few things, then you go down and start talking about numbers. What are the tangible things you can measure? And when we talk about measurement, we have a start and an end goal. So this could be number of leadership development programs you've executed. What's that number? And then if you go a step lower than that, do those programs that you have executed, do those actually address certain issues? For example, barriers to Asian success, or how people get promoted easily? Do they talk about negotiation skills? You got to look at that too. In addition, if you go back to the third bullet point, what tangibles can you measure immediately? How many professional connections have you helped make through these networking sessions? Look at LinkedIn. Look at how many people are talking to each other. Look at how many people are putting down on their LinkedIn resumes part of NAP. And that will help you learn about that number, and then also learn how it grows. And then also just people who you have impacted through community service. We have food pantry sessions. We have walks that we do and participate with our partner organizations. Look how many people participate and how many people have been helped because of your volunteer service. And so you can look over here for examples. I'm gonna just talk through it in the next slide though. If you can go to the next one. Let's talk about this model instead. If we're talking about putting things down on paper, I think this is the better framework to go than if you were using a logic model. Isolate them into these 3 categories. Number 1, impact. That's your vision and mission. Number 2, activities. These are your strategies. How do you effectively mobilize your leadership and get engagement? And then you also talk about the bottom part is the capacity. And that's those basic metrics of how many people attended your event, how much revenue was generated during that event, how much did your membership grow after that event. Those are a few of the easier ones to talk about. But I want to go back up to the very top one because I think we get it. And yes, Ching, we will send out our slides. Brian, we talk a little bit about this. What is that? How do you actually do that? How do you tell people you are a premier organization? You can put all these numbers in front of them. But there's a different type of metric that you don't necessarily have numbers for, and that's what I call anecdotal impact. And that's when after a negotiation workshop that you hear feedback from somebody and they say, Harris, you know, I've never been told to ask for a promotion. I've never been told to raise my hand at the table. I've never been told as a person of a who's been living in America for X amount of years. I always thought that the right way was something like this. And so when you think back to those stories, how many people's lives are you kind of affecting and changing in there? And that's the other kind of impact we want to drive at NAB. So how do you measure progress towards those? Well, in Boston, we try to do it by talking about how many leaders did you actually build? What's the number of corporate leaders? That's promotion cases. We talk about community leaders. That's people who are part of your community who raise social organization and part of it. And then we talk about people leaders too. How many people did you promote into management? And how many people did you develop who have now a core team in your own organizations, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm gonna have to cut it short because I'm getting the nod from folks saying that our session is over. But yes, we will try to send out these slides to you via the somewhere Vu will figure out. He's a genius at these things. But I hope we were able to discuss most of, and I would actually just cut it to this. It's hard. Building an organization, especially a volunteer organization, is hard. You got to try and you got to practice and you got to keep practicing. That's the secret sauce.
Absolutely. Thank you, Harris, for that. So with that being said, I hope that I encourage folks throughout today's NLA to definitely reach out to us or even all the leaders that you meet here to kind of talk through strategies on how to build your leadership and board governance. But thank you again. We will have the resources out there. So with that being said, our session is done. And I think Harris just made a point. There is